Hello.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
I'm going to raise this up for a bit. It'll no doubt have to be lowered for people who aren't me. Thank you all for coming to our 31st annual fall fundraiser. The organization is New Hampshire Peace Action. Show of hands, do we have anyone who is not a member of New Hampshire Peace Action in the audience? I know we had a few people.
Oh, all right.
Few hands?
Membership committee.
Okay, you should think about that. So this is my 5th fall fundraiser. Is that better? Okay. Yes. This is my 5th fall fundraiser as director here. And by our best reckoning, we don't think any director has ever made it to their 6th fall fundraiser as director of New Hampshire Peace Action. Would very much like to be the first. I wanted to go over a little bit of what we have done this year and what we're working on at New Hampshire Peace Action. And I put some bullets and I've just cut and pasted them, so if you've read your whole program book, I'm sorry to go over it all again. But since our last fall fundraiser, we brought Jamal Abdi, he's the policy director for the National Iranian American Council, for a series of discussions around New Hampshire on US-Iran policy. It was one of the most impactful events that I've been at, and the reason, there was one in particular where a group called Act for America, which actually is classified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group, an anti-Muslim hate group, came to give Jamal trouble. And every single one of them walked out of his presentation with the opinion that attacking Iran would be absolutely absurd, insane, and against our national interest. So, I think it was a small presentation, didn't have great turnout. I think there were maybe 20 people in the room. But to have the impact of taking the people who are your primary opponents on an issue and having them go, oh, wait, that doesn't make, you're right, it doesn't make any sense for us to be engaging in hostile and possibly military actions with these people when there are all these roads to diplomacy. We had our 3rd annual Bruce Allen Downing Jam for Peace. Actually, that has gone back to just the Bruce Allen Downing Jam, but 8 bands played at the Flying Monkey last November. We relaunched our website using the WordPress interface. If you haven't checked it out in the last year or so, the website is redone. We had our annual March conference on building a culture of peace and nonviolence. This year our speaker was Father John Deere. I will never miss him again if he is anywhere in New England and speaking. He was one of the most moving speakers I've heard. On tax day, we put out hundreds of flyers at post offices around the state, telling people about what our federal budget looks like, and why we need to change that and re-examine our priorities as a country. I presented Move the Money presentations all over the state, many to Democratic Party headquarters, because those are folks who maybe aren't seeing some of the things that we are, but we really feel like we can engage in our most current project, which we're going to talk about with Sandra in a minute. We've been working on a piece of state-level legislation in our 501c4, and that is around the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. This is a test that's given to most high school juniors in New Hampshire, and the results from that test are sent to recruiters without parental knowledge or oversight. So it's what that is essentially a breach of student privacy. Most schools give it, most parents aren't aware of that, and the results, including race, ethnicity, age, and a full profile of their, how they're testing in math, English, mechanical skills, general technical skills, is sent to recruiters without first consulting parents about whether or not those results should be sent out. So we've submitted that bill. We have a really great list of co-sponsors. We're looking at the Senate and trying to figure out how we can get it through. Anybody who knows Maggie Hassan, maybe put in a phone call and say she should sign it if that makes it to her desk. We tabled at Concord Market Days, although there was a microburst that destroyed a lot of our chum and t-shirts. It was kind of a sad tabling experience. We had our annual membership meeting with Mike Prokosh. Mike Prokosh is the New Priorities Network coordinator out of Massachusetts, and over the last couple of years they have put ballot initiatives in front of Massachusetts voters that even in heavy red districts have passed with flying colors, calling for cuts to the Pentagon budget and moving that money to supporting human needs. We had our Hiroshima and Nagasaki Remembrance Vigil. This is something we do every year that a small but loyal group of us go to. Lynn Chong has been kind of a key player in organizing that, our board chair. Thank you, Lynn. We co-sponsored the Culture of Peace film series, which we have been involved with for a few years. L.R. Berger, where's L.R.? Raise your hand. Hi, L.R. L.R. Berger is the prime mover and shaker who has created that. That's a film series here in Concord that, at this point, most months there are at least 40 people who come to talk about how we build a culture of peace. And then there was the effort to stop the war in Syria. So we kind of had a 2-week window. It looked like we were going to go to war with Syria. Like there was at least going to be a bombing campaign. And it didn't look like this was going to be something that we had a lot of say in. It looked like the president was going to sign an executive order and start bombing. And at some point, a number of Congress people called for the president to bring it before Congress. And on a Friday night, President Obama said, you know what, I am going to bring this before Congress. And we had to kind of kick in a very fast way and do a lot of work very quickly. During those 2 weeks, I had mornings where I came in way before the sun came up and I'd check the whip count. There was a whip count that was being kept by National Peace Action and the Friends Committee on National Legislation. I'd check that count, and then I'd look at any statements for what our 4 representatives had been saying or doing. I wrote op-eds. A lot of people in this room wrote op-eds. We generated thousands of calls to all 4 of our representatives. Carol Shea Porter came down in the right place right off the bat and said, this is not a good idea. There's no positive outcome that can come from bombing Syria. And then 3 of our representatives it wasn't clear early on. Statements from Annie McLean Custer and Kelly Ayotte suggested that both of them were leaning in support of a strike off the bat. And of course, as most of us know, Jeanne Shaheen did vote in committee in favor of authorizing military force. But Kelly Ayotte and Annie McLean Custer, after we had a rally in downtown Concord with over 150 people, I sent messages to my congressional contacts on an almost daily basis. We generated calls and letters and emails, and Kelly Ayotte and Annie McLean Custer went our way. And as we watched the national whip count, the no's kept getting more and more prolific, and finally it crossed that line where we knew that we had, in the House, stopped a war. And what a thing that is in the US, where we're almost always at war somewhere in the world. And as a culture, we never say no to war. But we did this. This year we stopped a war. We said no to war. We organized and we did that. I remember when I first started at New Hampshire Peace Action, Mo Baxley, who's the New Hampshire organizer for the Freedom to Marry campaign, came in after they'd passed marriage equality in New Hampshire and said, so there are these town meeting resolutions coming up, and I know we're going to lose some towns, that there are some towns that are going to say we don't allow gay marriage in our towns, and I don't know how to prepare my members to lose. Can you tell me about how you prepare your members to lose? And Mo was totally serious. Like, she came in because, well, you're peace, you know, and you don't ever get what you want. So how do you prepare? And we did it. We won. And what a great feeling that is. I think we also need to take some hope in the fact that we haven't gone to war with Iran. In 2004, we started hearing that Iran was developing nuclear weapons. They were a threat to our national security. They needed to be addressed. It was an emergency. They were within a year of developing nuclear weapons. And for the past 10 years, they've been within a year of developing nuclear weapons. We have continued to hear calls to start bombing or invade Iran. And we have made sure that we're standing ready to do what we did with Syria and step in and say there's no way we're going to allow this country to go into another senseless, expensive, in both life and money war. That it's not going to happen. Don't bring us, don't try to sell us on another war, because we're not buying it anymore. Something that we did. You know, I can't, as New Hampshire's one full-time paid activist who's working just on peace and nuclear disarmament and military spending, I can't take credit for that, because it's a national movement, and it's certainly the power rests with you, rests with the grassroots. You know, but we stopped a war, and we've held off a war with Iran this long, and we're strong, and I thank you for that strength. We have a lot to be proud of as an organization. We have a lot to be proud of as a movement right now. You know, here in the U.S., where every war is a good war, and stopping one is unheard of. We stopped a war, but we're not without our problems. We have a few. Over the past decade, Pentagon spending has more than doubled. At this point, it accounts for almost 60% of our federal discretionary budget, which is why we're pushing our new town meeting Move the Money resolutions, which Sandra and I will talk about in a bit. Organizationally, the peace movement is having problems, where we're celebrating that moment, that wonderful moment in action of stopping the war in Syria. Military Families Speak Out, which is was a national organization of military families opposed to war and militarization, have closed their doors and laid off their last staff. United for Peace and Justice has let go of their last staff. They still have a working committee, but United for Peace and Justice no longer have staff. They were once the largest umbrella peace group in the country. National Peace Action has laid off staff, and also everyone at National at this point is on 80% pay. So as far as our organizations, there seems to be a feeling that it's not important to keep these organizations going. And I, for one, feel like it's important that we're here doing this, and like maybe those grassroots do depend on us when the time comes. For our part in New Hampshire, you know, we at our current financial path, if we have an average end-of-year appeal, we're going to have to talk about furloughing Doreen and I probably in late January or early February. It's something that's a really bad time with the Move the Money campaign for us to talk about not having staffing. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the baby card. I would like to not have to find another job or be on unemployment for a couple months. You know, I want you guys to kind of, you're our membership, and I'm going to go ahead and make a pitch as part of what we did this year. And that is, if you can turn to page 7 of your program book, you'll see a list of sponsors and hosts. And you'll notice the 250 and above level, there are 250 and above level sponsors right now on that list. And that is, I know that's a product of the economy. You know, many who have sponsored in the past were not able to this year. Think about how many jobs would have been lost and what the economic impact would have been if we'd gone to war with Syria. How many of our tax dollars go to Pentagon bloat like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the economic impact of which is more than the entire sequester? It's a 1.5 trillion with a TR dollar project that the Pentagon has repeatedly said they don't want and can't use. Over its 10-year lifespan, Winslow Wheeler estimated the impact at 1.5 trillion. We also have projects like the M1A1 Abrams tank straight into boneyards because we have as many functional tanks as we need. We made over 3,000 this year. The C-17 cargo plane straight into boneyards because we have as many functional planes as we need. It's my 5th fundraiser as the director of New Hampshire Peace Action, and no one has ever made it to the 6th, and I would like to be the first, and I can't do that without your help. So as we move into the end of the year and I send out my end of year appeal and my membership renewals, I'm just asking you to look at what you can do and think about how much it's worth to you, that there's someone there waiting and working so that when they try to start a war with Syria or Iran, there's someone organizing and making sure that that doesn't happen and keeping relationships with those congressional representatives so that we can talk to them. Donates time, donates money. Anybody who cares about this organization comes to events, makes those phone calls. We need everyone, and some people are feeling guilty, and you shouldn't. Do what you can and can the rest. So, love to talk a little bit about the Move the Money project. So I'm going to invite Sandra Yarney to come up, and I know she has something prepared. We also have a signature ad that we are going to be running in the Concord Monitor, and you can see that out on the table on your way out. The City of Concord's contribution to the Pentagon budget in 2013 was $69.92 million. That's more than the city budget here in Concord. And so this signature ad we're trying to run in the Concord Monitor talks about what some of the trade-offs are, what the City of Concord could do with that money if it weren't going into the Pentagon. So have a look at that, and I'm going to turn it over to Sandra for a bit.
I'll try to be brief here. So what could Concord do with $69 million that it sends to the federal government, 60% of which is used for war? It could hire 1,100 new teachers. It could provide 18,000 children with health care, and it could fit every home in Concord with solar cells, providing 100% of Concord's electric grid 5 times over. That's what's out on the table, and that's what's going to be in the ad. Now, every community in New Hampshire has the opportunity to go to their town meeting, or if it's a charter community, or if it's a town or a city, can actually get their council people to pass a resolution to ask that the budget of the military be cut by 25%. This is really pretty modest cut, considering that our military spending is more than all the nations of the world combined. Why are we doing something like this? And I think this is the time to be talking about this, because people are very concerned about what happened with the shutdown of our government, the jobs that are being lost, the people that are not receiving food stamps, the cuts to Social Security that are being proposed. The list is endless. And so Move the Money is not supposed to be just for peace activists. It's supposed to be our getting together with other people in the community that are concerned about human needs. So this would be people that are working in soup kitchens, people that are providing mental health services to lower and middle class people, just teachers, just bridge people that are interested in the infrastructure. There are, over 100 bridges in New Hampshire that are not very safe to be driving over. So every community will have slightly different needs. So we're really asking you to get in on board with this and find other people that you can work with, and hopefully Will be around to guide us through this with information from National Peace Action. It is something that is being spearheaded by National Peace Action, but it is something that's for all communities that care about human needs. So think about being on the ad in the Concord Monitor and signing up to actually find members of your community that would be interested in doing this. And this office will help you to find the numbers related to what you give to the federal government, how much is going to the military, and a 25% cut is not even out of line with what the Pentagon has been talking about and approving, actually. Okay, thank you.
Over to Lynn, who will introduce Dr. Caldicott. I have a lot of thank yous, and I'm going to forget some. I'm going to start with Susan Bruce and Emily Cook, yes? Yeah, and John Cuna, who cooked all day today to make the lovely food, and I think we can all... Also, the baked stuffed mushrooms came from Emily Spencer, who is our membership renewal advocate. If you are a member and you do not renew, Emily will call you, then she will come to your house and she will threaten you. She is absolutely terrifying. That's her back there between Derek and Alex. Emily, can you raise your hand? That's Emily. Terrifying. We had cupcakes for my little sister Gilly, who drove them down from Burlington. We had my ex-wife Etta, who some of you know, brought in the curry chicken salad sandwiches. Chris Hobby and Lynn Chong brought cookies, spring rolls, and I told you I was going to forget some things. Also, Squamscott Beverages donated half of the sodas that were out there. Bagel Works donated the coffee. So if you ever need a cup of coffee, go see Bagel Works, tell them Peace Action sent you, and maybe next year they'll give us more coffee. Thank you to New Hampshire Youth for Peace and Justice, who came and they were here selling raffle tickets and helping set up and helping with the food setup. They are a wonderful group of young people who I can depend on to volunteer for this kind of event, and who I have the privilege of joining for our 2 annual youth conferences and overnights. They're just a great bunch of kids, and grateful to have them. Thank you to my board, both the C3 and the C4 boards. I couldn't do any of this without your help and support. Thank you to the Concord Auditorium. And who am I forgetting? I know I'm forgetting people, Lynn. Who am I forgetting?
Our volunteers.
Right, our volunteers, Gray and Helen, our ushers, Nancy, Jane Lemeland, who ran the front check-in desk. You know, it really is a community that does this work, and I am grateful to be a part of it, and to have the privilege of being the one who gets to be part of it full-time as my life.
It says, I read the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. I made this painting. I painted this in 1978. Those are my 2 daughters. That's my best self-portrait where I'm looking in the mirror. So my eyes are kind of sideways. But at the time, I was hearing about nuclear power and nuclear war, I'm going to say from 5 different doctors. And Dr. Helen Caldicott, our speaker tonight, I'm going to introduce here last. But first of all, my father was a doctor, and he subscribed to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists since it started. And I was just a little kid. I really didn't know much about this problem at all, which is what we do with our children. We kind of shelter them. But I knew about the clock on the front cover that got its hands moved back and forth closer or further from midnight, because the threat was that at midnight there'd be a nuclear war or nuclear exchange after the Hiroshima time of World War II. But I wanted to kind of remember tonight, while I'm introducing Dr. Caldicott, that the names that were prominent for me in the 1970s when we started to be aware because of Seabrook being built, and then shortly after that, Ronald Reagan spending so much on nuclear weaponry to outspend the Russians, that Dr. Carl Johnson was a doctor who was impressive for me. He was the health director of Jefferson County in Colorado, and he uncovered what had been like really low government numbers on how much plutonium was being released from Rocky Flats, which made nuclear weaponry triggers, and how much leukemia there was. He was a real strong public advocate as a health director. He had a lot of flack because the political boards that were sort of overseeing him and his job were realtors, and they didn't want the property values to drop because of his revelations. And he died way too young in 1988 of a heart problem. He was 59, I think. So I feel like I want to say salute and hello again to Dr. Carl Johnson. I happened to meet him. I was at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop as a grad student, and he came to the medical school to give a lecture. It was right after 3 Mile Island accident. This was 1980. And I had with me some maps from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that showed radiation plumes, and these had been gathered by local citizenry. And this woman named Jane Lee had sent me these copies, and after the medical school lecture was over, this was 1980, I went up to him and I showed them to him, and he was so neat. He reached right in his pocket for his wallet and said, "Will you sell those to me?" He wanted them, and so I did, and then I just got some more copies. It was only the cost of the copies that he was paying me, so I could get some more copies. So I feel like Dr. Carl Johnson should still be here. He's not. He did really good work. I want to remember Dr. Ernest Sternglass. He wrote this book, Low-Level Radiation, and he personally made me aware that low-level radiation damages your genes. It's actually more dangerous than high-level, which just kills your cells. It just kills your cells outright if it's high, but damages them if they're low-level radiation. He exposed a lot in his book, Low-Level Radiation, which I think I read a few times. I thought it was so informative and good. And I wanted to remember Dr. Alice Stewart, who did the early studies of childhood exposure, including infant or fetal, because of Dr. Alice Stewart, who took a lot of flack for it in her career. We finally don't let pregnant women be x-rayed. But that was, not an automatic win. She had to work hard for that. And then, so I feel like those doctors all impressed me so much that I did this painting where I feel like I'm worried for my kids going into the future. In '78, one daughter was 8 and one was 5. And I thought, my gosh, they're going into this world where we have to do something about the nuclear dangers we've created. We can't just let them be. And then Dr. Helen Caldicott, she came to Plymouth State when it was college, I think in 1978, maybe 79. We had just started a science club among our students. I was a faculty member there, still am. And our science club president, Peter Gibbs, said to Dr. Helen Caldicott, probably by phone back then, would you come to speak in New Hampshire and tell us, about nuclear weaponry, nuclear power? And at the time she said, for 1,000 people. And Peter said, I think we could get 300, maybe. And she said, okay. And she came, which was very nice of her. And while I've been here tonight, I've heard that she was the commencement speaker at Keene State right about that time. And we have some people in the audience tonight who were telling me this while we were eating out there, that she was not a popular speaker. She did the commencement speech, but a lot of parents had come not to learn that the world had a shaky underpinning to it, that we had all this nuclear weaponry poised. They didn't want to hear that at their kids' graduation, so she wasn't a very popular speaker that night. I love her. I think she started I know that she started as a pediatrician. She was at Boston Children's Hospital, and at the time she came to Plymouth and taught at Harvard Medical School. She's a great person. She started, this one I have to keep looking at. It has a better name now, Nuclear Policy Research Institute. It became what we now know as Beyond Nuclear. People that we love, and I talk to them, I email them, I give them money all the time. That's her outfit, and also Physicians for Social Responsibility. We've had some local members there. Dr. Helen Caldicott has her fingerprint on so many positive ways to do something about our threat from nuclear. I'll just generalize that way. I'm ever so grateful that she's here tonight, and I really am looking forward to hearing what she has to tell us.
Stairs are dangerous. I'm 75 and they need a banister because I could break my neck on these stairs, as could many of us. That's number one. Number two, thank you for that lovely introduction, and I knew Alice Stewart quite well. She was a wonderful woman. She had buck teeth and frightfully English. And she came to testify before a Senate committee once, and they were giving her a hard time, and she said to one of them, she said, "Now listen to me, young man." And the senators shut up. She was the one who did the Oxford study and found out that one X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in the baby. And that's why if women who are pre-menopausal have an X-ray, they always ask when your last menstrual period was, and they don't do it in the second half of your menstrual cycle because you could be pregnant. And she fought like mad, and people fought back, and Sir Richard Dole, who worked out that tobacco causes cancer, etc., he fought her, but eventually they had to admit that she was right. I'm currently having a debate in the New York Times online section with a guy called David Ropick and Revkin, and they're going hell for leather for me because they say that I'm wrong about this study, which is the Chernobyl study done by the New York Academy of Sciences. Now, this is the first publication of collated 5,000 Russian articles in Slavic that were translated into English. It's the most scary medical document I've ever read. Now, when the National Academy of Sciences put it out, there were pro-nuclear people who are very strong, probably sociopaths, many of them are, no moral conscience, you know, smart but no moral conscience, like Cheney and Rumsfeld. They rise to the top like cream. Anyway, they got very annoyed with this and they discredited it. And so the National Academy put out a statement saying, look, we publish it in the interests of, you know, doing public service, but in fact we dissociate ourselves from it because it wasn't peer-reviewed. Oh my God! It wasn't peer-reviewed in the typical Western way that articles get peer-reviewed here. You have to have exact numbers and exact this and exact that. But the fact it was Russian peer-reviewed. Oh, but that wouldn't be good enough for Western scientists, would it? But it's the most extraordinary document I've ever read, and it said in 2006, I think, that up to 1 million people had already died from Chernobyl. And it's extraordinary from a medical perspective because the diseases are diverse. Of course, there's a hell of a lot of thyroid cancer, leukemia, and cancers of all organs. Radiation causes cancer of all organs. A lot of diabetes because cesium-137, which is ubiquitous in reactors, and that's what they're measuring that's coming out of Fukushima, which I'm about to talk about in a minute, concentrates in the endocrine glands. So pancreas, where the islets of Langerhans are that produce insulin, so it kills those cells and so diabetes develops. Cesium also concentrates in the thyroid along with radioactive iodine, so that can induce thyroid cancer and Hashimoto's disease, thyroid cysts and thyroid nodules. It also concentrates in the myocardium in the heart, and so there are a lot of sudden deaths, particularly in children who are survivors from Chernobyl. There's noted to be premature aging amongst children. They're getting diseases that old people get. There are a lot of people who are mentally not up to scratch, and in fact a study was done in Sweden because they got a high fallout from Chernobyl, and the babies who were in utero at the time of Chernobyl have a lower than normal IQ because the developing brain is very sensitive to radiation. Very high incidence of cataracts because cataracts are induced by radiation. What other diseases are there? It's absolutely fascinating from a medical perspective, and a lot of the stuff we really didn't know. It's new. And so these damn scientists who are nuclear people, they're putting it down and discrediting it. So I wrote a letter to the New York Times referring to it. My God, am I in trouble? Because the WHO has an unholy alliance with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They signed an agreement in 1959 that the World Health Organization wouldn't publish anything about the medical effects of atomic accidents unless the IAEA said they could. Well, the IAEA's mission is to promote nuclear power. And so the WHO didn't go to Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, or anywhere else and examine the people on the ground, examine the patients, as have, you know, many of the physicians and epidemiologists in this study. They estimated, and this is what they do all the time, the amount of radiation that escaped from Chernobyl. Then they estimated the dose that people got, external dose, not internal dose from eating radioactive food. And then they worked out the number of people who died, and they have the gall to say only 31 liquidators died. Russia brought in 800,000 people, mostly from the military, to drop lead into the reactor as it was burning furiously. It burned for 10 days because it had graphite control rods like lead in pencils, which just burns, and the stuff was going up into the stratosphere and dumping all over Europe. And these people got really high doses of radiation, and there's a section in this book about how many died, and it's over 1,000. And they say only 3,000 died from Chernobyl. Well, they don't even know. They haven't even been there. And then UNSCEAR, United Nations, I can't remember what it stands for. Anyway, they are coming out now with guesstimates about Fukushima. And most of their data and standards are derived from the Hiroshima data. And America set up the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission after they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't examine people for 5 years. And in that 5 years, a lot of people died because their immune systems were damaged. They died of infection, they died of bleeding because they had low platelet levels and the like. And then they didn't even start looking at cancers till when was the bomb dropped? 1958. And the radiation that people received in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was mostly gamma radiation, a neutron, external radiation like X-rays, but not internal emitters that are being extruded from Fukushima, and I'm going to go through that in a minute, and Chernobyl. And that's what can actually, well, first of all, that leukemia increased 5 years after Hiroshima. So there was an increase in leukemia, and then 15 years later, solid cancer started appearing in the Hibakusha, the survivors. And in fact, new cancers are appearing now. And so each cancer has a different incubation period or latent period of carcinogenesis. Leukemia is 2 to 5 years to 10. Solid cancers start appearing 15 years later. Breast, lung, I can't remember what. And now new cancers of the genitourinary tract are arising, and multiple myeloma cancers of the bone marrow. So we're still learning. Those people who were studied by the Americans, know what? They never were treated. Never treated. Just used as guinea pigs. That data is now used as the standard to work out how many people are dying from Chernobyl, and it's absolutely ridiculous. There's no scientific merit in this at all. Yet people like George Monbiot, who write for The Guardian, attack me full frontal, saying I don't know what I'm talking about because the IAEA and the WHO says that only a few people died from Chernobyl. So I'm sick of these people. They are, most of them are physicists who know nothing about medicine. How dare they? Or they're health physicists. And the man who started off health physics was a man called Carl Z. Morgan. Wonderful man. And he said towards the end of his life, health physicists have become prostitutes of the nuclear industry, apologising. But they don't know any medicine. They haven't helped children to die. They don't understand genetic disease. They don't understand radiobiology and pathogenesis and the like. And so these are the people making the standards, dominating the debate in the damn New York Times, all the news that's fit to print. It was Judith Miller who actually initiated the Iraq War well, she had an affair with Scooter Libby, and she wrote 5 front-page articles about how Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which was a lie. So the New York Times is probably the best paper in this country, but clearly leaves much to be desired. And I guess I've got a bee in my bonnet at the moment. I'm damned if I'm going to let these, well, I'm Australian, I'm allowed to speak Australian, bastards, get away with what they're getting away with. I'm sick of them. And I'm going to go full frontal, and they can tear me apart. There's a man called Tim Mousseau, who's an evolutionary biologist, and he's going into the exclusion zones around Chernobyl and Fukushima, where the radiation is terribly high, and looking at the birds, the insects, and the plants, and finding the birds have smaller than normal brains, like the children I described. There are many mutations, crooked feathers, strange tails and wings, white mutations. You'll see it in a minute. Many of the male birds are sterile, and what you see in animals, we extrapolate to humans. We test all our drugs on animals first before we give them to humans. So therefore, and because the birds reproduce fast, he's able to watch generation after generation and see what happens as genes damaged in sperm and eggs get passed on generation to generation. And then you extrapolate back to humans. He is finding it very hard to get any money to study this. The DOE won't give him any money. He will get the Nobel Prize, I'm sure, in science, because the work he's doing is pioneering work, number one. And number two, he's putting his own life at risk, going to extremely high radiation zones. And there are many of his colleagues who are doing it with him, wonderful people. But no, I can't take any questions till the end.
Just repeat his name, please.
Timothy Mousseau. Mousseau. Tim Mousseau. Dr. Tim Mousseau. And he's an evolutionary biologist. So I love talking to him because I love, you know, evolution and radiation and mutations and how we evolved and Charles Darwin and the whole thing. So I guess I'm starting, and then I was on Al Jazeera last night for half an hour. Well, there are other people on too. I don't know how many millions we broadcast to, but there was this man called Dr. Robert Gale, who is a transplant surgeon, who went to Chernobyl to do some bone marrow transplants on people who were very severely irradiated. And he's now in Fukushima. I couldn't believe what he said. He is saying only 31 of the liquidators died. He's an apologist for and talking about the WHO and IAEA. Well, I actually got quite aggressive because I'm sick of these characters, and I told him he was wrong. I told him he was lying on air, and they said it was a great show. I suppose because, you know, when you watch television today, it's so mealy-mouthed. It's really pathetic. And everyone's laughing and beautiful women. Well, it's nice to have some beautiful women and intelligent ones, but you know, you don't get really hard news. Even PBS and NPR now, we have underwriters. Yeah, they're advertisers. So they've kind of sold their souls, and they don't really go for the truth flat out, big time. I don't see that. That's why social media is important, I suppose, but it's a very small minority of people that actually tweet and go to Facebook and learn other things. Now, okay, so now I'm going to talk about Fukushima, which I've been following very closely ever since it happened. I remember being in Australia and my partner was tweeting, and over the tweets came in minute by minute what was happening with the earthquake and then the tsunami. And 2 days after it happened, I suddenly got this dreadful feeling in the pit of my stomach. This is going to be endless. And there's nothing anyone can do about it. So what happened was the tsunami, first of all, they lost the external power supply, which supplies the electricity to the pumps. And each reactor, 6 of them, each reactor needs 1 million gallons a minute of cooling water to keep it cool. And that's the same for Vermont Yankee, and the same for Seabrook, and all of the reactors, 1 million gallons a minute. So with global warming and the rivers in France getting really hot, the water in France often is too hot to cool the reactors, so they have to shut the reactors down. Or else with huge storms like the hurricane or that dreadful typhoon they've just had in the Philippines yesterday, where 1,200 people are dead that they know of. Many reactors are built at sea level, so you can see that they're going to be flooded and the control room's flooded and the like. So they lost their external supply, the pumps didn't work. But underneath the reactors, there are huge diesel generators, huge, like the size of a house, many of them. And they are supposed to kick in when the external power supply is lost. But however, in came the tsunami and drowned the diesel reactors. So they couldn't work the pumps, and they were running out getting batteries from cars to try and operate the pumps. So within the first 2 or 3 days, 3 of the reactors melted down. 3. Now, at 3 Mile Island, there was a partial meltdown and a lot of radiation escaped. At Chernobyl, it really wasn't a meltdown, it was an explosion triggered by a stupid man who is a specialist in hydroelectricity, not nuclear, who did a crazy experiment in the middle of the night, and there was a huge explosion. And he told his underlings to go and see what happened from the control room. They went out and they said, "It's gone." And he said, "What?" They said, "It's gone." He said, "What's gone?" They said, "The reactor's gone." He said, "Don't be ridiculous, go out and have another look." And the control room filled up with white dust, and they all died soon after of what's called acute radiation illness. If you get a really high dose of radiation, the actively dividing cells of your body die, so your hair falls out. Like patients who are having chemo or radiation therapy. Your gut cells die, so you get awful nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. And the bone marrow dies, so your white blood cells fail to function, you die of massive infection, and the platelets get killed, which cause clotting, so you die of massive infection and bleeding. They died soon thereafter, and many of the liquidators did. And then, now we've got Fukushima. 3 meltdowns. Do you know the Japanese government didn't tell the people in Japan for 3 months that there had been 3 meltdowns? You remember at 3 Mile Island, they didn't really tell you what was happening for quite a while. After Chernobyl, Gorbachev et al. Didn't tell people for 10 days what was happening, although they did start evacuating people. The Russians were much more proactive than the Japanese have been with their people, evacuating them from Pripyat and other places. So what happens with a meltdown is, because the cooling water's lost, you've got 100 tonnes of red-hot fissioning uranium. The uranium isn't hot, but the fission products are stinking hot, thermally. And I think the melting point is 2,600 degrees centigrade, I think. I can't remember. And then the whole mass of uranium with fission products melts into a lava. And it melted, they both melted their way through 6 inches of steel in the reactor vessel and landed on the containment floor made of concrete. And it's thought that one or several may have melted their way through the containment concrete and steel into the earth. And that's called in the nuclear industry the melt through to China syndrome. And you'll all remember the film with Jane Fonda and Henry. What's his name?
Jack Lemmon.
Jack Lemmon, yeah, gorgeous. And that was put out just after, I think, 3 Mile Island happened.
Before.
So we had, well, with the meltdowns, what happens is that as the uranium fuel gets very hot, the fuel rods, which are 12 feet long and ½ an inch thick, are covered and cladded by zirconium. And zirconium, when it gets hot, and it reacts with air or water to form hydrogen. And so hydrogen was formed as the reactors melted down, a lot. And there was supposed to be a vent at the side to release hydrogen if such an event happened. But the thing was either powered by electricity, or 2 workers had to go into a very radioactive area where they'd get a lethal dose of radiation and turn this big wheel lots of times, and it was very stiff and they couldn't open it. So hydrogen collected in the 4 reactors, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and there were 4 hydrogen explosions. But in number 3, I think. Arnie Gunderson, who is a wonderful man living in Vermont, a nuclear engineer, thinks there was actually an excursion or nuclear explosion because a lot of plutonium has been found 60k from the reactors. I can go into that later. And at the same time, a huge amount of radiation was released into the air. Now, they were lucky because the wind was blowing from west to east in the first few days, so the radiation blew across the Pacific. The ambient levels of radiation in Seattle went up 40,000 times above normal. There was a hell of a fallout all over America, including Boston, of various isotopes, including americium, which is a deadly carcinogenic agent. But then the wind changed and it blew towards the northwest of Japan, over Japan. I'll show you some maps in a minute. And the Japanese knew where the radiation was going because they had a system called SPEEDY that was measuring radiation, and the Americans were flying aeroplanes measuring the gamma radiation, and they knew where it was going. But they didn't tell the people because they didn't want to create panic. So the people, thousands of them, tens of thousands, fled into the path of the highest radiation level. Now that's criminal. Those people should be put into jail. And then what happened? Then at the same time, huge amounts of water were being emptied into the Pacific Ocean. Every day since that accident 2.5 years ago, 400 tonnes of highly radioactive water are being released into the Pacific Ocean. But the radiation is getting stronger because they built the 6 reactors on an earthquake fault or nearby on an old riverbed. And the water and the mountains are just behind Fukushima, so the water comes flowing down from the mountains under the reactors. Well, when the reactors were in one piece, they could use pumps to pump out that underground water. But now, the water is pouring down from the mountains and mixing with the molten cores. The cores are called corium, and becoming extremely radioactive. They're pumping out about 300 tonnes of radioactive water a day, and there's a whole series of huge tanks, 3 stories high, 1,060, each containing, I can't remember how, I think there are 360,000 tonnes of radioactive water that are being pumped into these tanks. The tanks are made only to last 5 years. They've got rubber seals, they've got corroded joints, they're leaking. The workers, they had only 2 workers who would monitor these tanks and walk around every day with a Geiger counter. And, you know, now, as the water leaks, the areas are becoming extremely radioactive. The workers are being very exposed. They're running out of workers. They're bringing in workers, people from who are mentally retarded, from mental hospitals, and homeless from the streets of Tokyo. And the subcontractors for TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, are the Yakuza, who are the Japanese mafia. And apparently, for many years, the nuclear industry in Japan has used Yakuza to supply the workers. The workers are getting really high doses of radiation, and they're really worried they're going to run out of workers. As well as filling up these, and they've got nowhere else really to place any more tanks. But guess what, as my 4-year-old grandson would say, guess what, Grandma? This is going to go on for the next 50 years. And if there's another earthquake greater than 7 on the Richter scale, these tanks are going to collapse. And what will happen to the water? They're just adjacent to the Pacific. Now, you're lucky you live on the Atlantic. I live on the Pacific. And there's a plume of radiation going across directly from Fukushima to the west coast, and I can't remember the name of the current. And it's very radioactive, and the plume of high radiation will reach the northern part of the west coast early next year, and California later in the year in 2014. They're catching tuna off the coast of California now that contains cesium from Fukushima. Because although the Pacific is a huge body of water and the isotopes get diluted, the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation, because the radioactive isotopes reconcentrate by orders of magnitude at each step of the food chain. Algae, thousands of times. Then the crustaceans eat the algae hundreds more times. Then the little fish eat the crustaceans, then the big fish. And we stand at the apex of the food chain. So the food is most concentrated and the isotopes most concentrated in our bodies. You can't taste, smell or see radioactive materials in the food you're eating. Don't buy any food from Japan. Much of the rice is radioactive. They're encouraging the Fukushima farmers to go back and farm on their land, which is extremely radioactive. The leafy vegetables are radioactive. Tea grown to the south of Tokyo, green tea is full of radiation. And they're feeding radioactive food to kindergarten children. Children are 10 to 20 times more sensitive to radiation than adults. Fetuses thousands of times more so, and little girls are twice as sensitive as little boys, and women more sensitive than men. However, the standard the nuclear industry uses is for a 70 kilogram white 25-year-old male, which is ridiculous because we're a heterogeneous population in terms of sensitivity to radiation. 10 million people at the moment are living in really high radiation areas. They're allowing people to go back and live in Fukushima. Many of the women, women really have a sixth sense, and they escaped and ran away with their children knowing what was happening and went to non-radioactive areas in Japan. But the husbands wouldn't go, so there's a lot of divorce and separation in families. I have addressed 2 huge meetings in Tokyo and I think Kyoto of mostly women, but men too, and I go through the medical effects of radiation, and then it turns into a medical consultation, and it's so sad. The women will stand up and say, well, does radiation concentrate in breast milk? Or my child's got diarrhea, or my child's been getting this rash, what does that mean? They don't know. And when I finished my talk, they'd come up to me and say, oh, thank you so much for telling us the truth. The doctors have been told by the superiors not to tell patients that their symptoms are related to radiation. There's been a lot of infections in children, particularly post-Fukushima, and a lot of very bad nosebleeds, which probably means their platelets are low and been damaged by radiation. Already now, 44 children under the age of 18 have been diagnosed or have suspected diagnosis of thyroid cancer. The incidence of thyroid cancer in children is 1 or 2 in a million. We didn't start seeing thyroid cancer in Chernobyl for 5 years. So therefore, it indicates to me these children got a hell of a dose of radioactive iodine and probably cesium, but also it indicates to me they got a hell of a dose of everything else, because everything's mixed together. Not just the children, but the adults too, running through that radioactive cloud and still eating radioactive food, which accumulates in organs. Building 4, well, Building 3 was severely damaged, and what is happening with this water pouring out down from the mountains, the reactors are now standing on almost liquefied mud. So the foundations of the buildings are very tenuous. Building 3 was severely damaged by the earthquake and the hydrogen explosion, or maybe a nuclear explosion, and Building 4 is very damaged. Now, they just removed the whole core from Building 4, of over 100 tonnes of fuel, and they put it in a cooling pool 100 feet above the ground on the roof of the reactor. Your Vermont Yankee is the same design as the reactors at Fukushima, GE Mark 1. Plymouth is. I knew the 3 GE engineers who designed those reactors, and they resigned in '75 saying they were dangerous, and they testified before the Congress. But what did the Congress do? Nothing. One's died of leukemia and 2 are still alive. Although the reactor is in usually a steel vessel, the cooling pools are protected by roofs, the same sort of roof as Kmart would have. No protection at all. And when the explosions occurred, the whole roof of the reactor vessel blew off, and the pools are exposed to the air. And Building 4 is so damaged that if there's another, and there are 400 tonnes of fuel in that, if there's another earthquake greater than 7, it is predicted Building 4 will collapse. If it does collapse and the cooling pool descends and lands on the ground, the water cooling it will escape and the rods will burn. And it's predicted that 10 times more cesium than was released at Chernobyl will be released from that, and 14,000 times more radiation than one Hiroshima bomb will be released. They're talking about evacuating Tokyo of 35 million people if this happens. It's got a building and put a huge crane on top because the original crane collapsed. And they're going to start removing this week bundles of rods. In each bundle, there are 75 rods. Each rod is 12 feet long and half an inch thick. So radioactive, if you stand next to it for a few seconds, you'll get a lethal dose of radiation. Very hot and very radioactive. So they're going to lift the bundles out by the crane. Now, normally this is done by computers. With millimetres to spare, it's a very minute operation. But there are no computers. And they're doing it by virtual hand with a crane, with workers who are recruited by Yakuza. A lot of the workers get drunk at night and they go to sleep during the day. And this has never been done before. Now, if a couple of bundles touch each other, they could start a fission reaction, which is a nuclear reaction, which will be devastating, and the whole of the Fukushima complex will have to be evacuated. If it's evacuated, then God knows what will happen. Number one. Number two, the fuel bundles have been bent, and also the racks on which they're racked have been damaged. So, as Arnie Gunnarsson said, if you've got a cigarette packet that's crooked and you try and pull a cigarette out, the cigarette will break, right? Or if you have cigarettes that are broken and you try and pull them out of the package, they're still broken. And if rods break, they will release argon, krypton, xenon, cesium, radioactive iodine, and all sorts of things. And again, the workers will have to evacuate. David Suzuki, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a very brilliant environmentalist in Canada. He said it's bye-bye Japan. Now, I've tried to get David to talk about Cameco and Canadian uranium and CANDU reactors for years, and he won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. He's now started to talk about it. Michio Kaku, who developed the string theory, he says the same thing. People are really scared. What will happen is, if there is a huge release of radiation, the winds go from west to east around the northern hemisphere, and you'll be dumped on. But the two air masses at the equator don't mix, so in Australia we won't get it. We'll get the radiation as the currents move around down the west coast of America and South America to Australia, and fish swim thousands of miles. The water will remain radioactive. Well, they say, the International Atomic Energy Agency, it's going to take 40 to 50 years to do anything about it. Meanwhile, the water's pouring down every day past the molten fuel. They don't even know where the fuel is, where the molten cores are. They don't know. They can't go in the buildings because they're so radioactive that even when they send robots in, the robots die. Men can't go in there, or women. I held a conference in the New York Academy of Medicine in March called The Medical and Ecological Consequences of Fukushima, with the best scientists in the world and the latest data from oceanographers who are measuring the Pacific and measuring the fish and the whole thing. And you can download it from my website, HelenCaldicottFoundation.org. I'll write it on the thing soon. And it's going to be published in a book called Crisis Without End by the New Press shortly. And it's got all the latest data about Fukushima, the animals, the birds, the humans, the oceans, the pollution, the predictions of cancer. If 1 million people have already died or more from Chernobyl 28 years previously, and 40% of the European landmass is going to be radioactive for the next 300 to 1,000 years, so people are going to be, I don't eat any European food because I don't know what's radioactive and what's not. Don't ever eat any Japanese food again. No miso, no seaweed, no fish, no nothing. They want to export their radioactive beef. Hillary Clinton signed an agreement with the Japanese just after the accident that you would continue in importing food from Japan. The EPA isn't measuring your fish in the FDA, and it's not measuring the ambient levels of radiation off the West Coast that should be because of this impending disaster should it happen. Should it happen. I'm practicing a bit of psychic numbing because I don't usually do that, but on the removing of spent fuel rods, I'm kind of thinking it's going to be all right, but no one knows and people are very extremely worried about it. I might show you some slides now. We'll start with the first one. And we'll need to turn off the spotlight, please. Can I... Mr. Lightman, can you turn off the spotlight, please? Thank you. No, that's not the one. Yep. Now, what you might not know is you only hear about cesium and radioactive iodine, and I can walk you through these isotopes, the common ones. But what you don't know is what really is in a nuclear reactor, Vermont Yankee. So we'll go a little bit up, yeah, stop there. In Vermont Yankee and in Plymouth and in Seabrook and all you've got 104 reactors, a couple of them are shut down now. So let's start here. You all, I'm sure, why doesn't this work? Someone gave me this and it's a pointer. Maybe it's run out of battery. Tritium. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, H3. It's got a half-life of 12.3 years. So you multiply a half-life by 10 or 20 to get its total radiological life because it decays. Say you have a pound of tritium. You can't, I don't think you can, but anyway, it decays so that in 12.2 years you have 12.3 years you have half a pound and so on. So it's around for a long time. And tritium, H3 combines with oxygen to form tritiated water, H3O. And you can't prevent tritium escaping from a nuclear reactor. They make a hell of a lot of tritium, and the only thing that prevents the escape of tritium is gold, because it's so dense. So it escapes through all the time from reactors into the air and into the water that's used for cooling. They say, oh, it's only radioactive hydrogen, don't worry about it. But experiments with rats have shown that it's extremely carcinogenic. It causes cerebral tumours, cancers in various organs, severe congenital anomalies, and genetic abnormalities. So tritium is damn dangerous. And in fact, if you go to the Journal of Health Physics, the health physicists in the industry are really scared of tritium, and there are a hell of a lot of articles about it. But they say to you, don't worry about it. So they lie, and they lie, and they lie. At least when I debated with generals from the Pentagon, they couldn't lie about what a nuclear weapon would do dropping on Concord, like it would vaporise, most people in Concord. And so it was better to debate with generals from the Pentagon than it is with the nuclear industry. Beryllium, now many of these isotopes have not been studied from a biological perspective to see where they go in the food chain or where they go in the human body. So there's beryllium, I don't know its half-life. Carbon-14 is ubiquitous in the body. Of course, all the genes are made with carbon. And carbon-14 has a half-life of over 1,000 years. And what I need to tell you is that there are 4 forms of radiation, X-rays. Hands up those who've never had an X-ray. You had a dental X-ray? Knee, you have. You've been X-rayed. We zap you all. The biggest irradiators of the public at the moment are doctors. Do not have a CT scan unless it's absolutely necessary. They give you a hell of a dose. Don't walk through those radiation monitors in the airports. Have a full body pat down. I do it every time. I don't care what parts of my body they touch. They're not to irradiate me. Children are going through those monitors. Babies are going through. It's really obscene. Each dose of radiation you receive adds to your risk of getting cancer. Radiation is cumulative. And And so even the lowest doses can initiate a cancer. So X-rays, you've all had X-rays and they go straight through your body. They only damage you the instant the technician says, breathe in, hold it, runs out and goes click. So they don't get irradiated. That's the instant your genes can be damaged. Then there's gamma radiation, which is given off by many of these isotopes, which is just like X-rays. And that's what the WHO and IAEA measure, gamma, because that's what was given off at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But then there's alpha radiation, which is particulate, composed of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, emitted from an unstable atom. And that's very carcinogenic. And I'll explain why in a minute. And then there's beta radiation. You say beta, I say beta. You say tomato, I say tomato. You know that song? Yep. Was it, who used to sing it? Sinatra? I don't know. Anyway, beta is just an electron, it travels further. Now, how does radiation cause cancer? In every cell of the body, there's a nucleus with chromosomes, but there's a pair of genes called regulatory genes that control the rate of cell division. And if a regulatory gene is hit by gamma radiation, X-rays, alpha or beta, it can be altered biochemically. The DNA gets altered. And the cell will sit quietly, you don't even know it's happened, for 5 to 80 years. And one day you feel a lump in your breast or on your leg or whatever, and that cell has started to divide by mitosis in a totally unregulated way into trillions of cells. So it takes a single mutation in a single gene in a single cell to kill you. Okay? That's what the nuclear industry doesn't understand, nor do they want to know. Number one. Number two, alpha radiation. If you inhale into your lung an alpha emitter, say plutonium or uranium or whatever, and it lands right here in a terminal air passage, a tiny amount, 1 microgram, a millionth of a gram, it irradiates a tiny, tiny volume of cells. Most of the cells die on the periphery because radiation decreases with the square of the distance. Some cells remain viable. The mutations develop and later on you get a lung cancer. So what does the nuclear industry do? It takes that dose and averages it out over both lung fields. They're really stupid. They give me the dry rot. Beta radiation does something similar. So when you're looking at tritium, it's a beta emitter and it's very carcinogenic. So beryllium carbon is beta. Silicon, I don't know. Phosphorus-32 is very dangerous. I think that's a potent gamma. Sulfur, chlorine, I don't know about chlorine. Argon is a noble gas. I can't go into that. Potassium-40, they say, well, you know, bananas are full of potassium-40, so, and that's a naturally occurring isotope. So, you know, getting radiation from a nuclear power plant is like eating a banana or sleeping next to your wife because she's radioactive. I mean, they really drive me crazy because they have no understanding of these emitters at all. What's important is, and when you get internal emitters, these are all internal emitters that they go into your body. They go to various organs, and I said many of them have not been analysed and researched about where they go in the body. But the cells that are affected by the beta or the alpha or the gamma, they can become carcinogenic. Calcium, of course, you know where calcium goes, to bones. And what goes in the bones is white blood cells, red blood cells, and if you get cancer of the white blood cells, that's leukemia. Scandium, I have no idea where that goes. More, I don't know their half-lives either. Oh, where are we now? Okay, vanadium, manganese, just think, this is all in Seabrook, all in Vermont Yankee. Iron, well, iron goes into the hemoglobin. Manganese, I don't know. Vanadium, cobalt-60 is very, very radioactive. Remember, they were going to make cobalt bombs. Nickel, zinc, selenium, krypton, rubidium, strontium, you know, strontium-90, that's what they measured during the weapons testing days. That's why Jack Kennedy stopped atmospheric testing, because we said strontium-90 would give children leukemia and cancer because it goes to the bone. Yttrium, I think it goes to bone. Zirconium, I don't know. More. Niobium, there are 5 niobium isotopes. Molybdenum, technetium, ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, silver 5. And there's a lot of radioactive silver in the meat of the cows in Fukushima. Cadmium, indium, 6 isotopes of tin, antimony, tellurium, cesium, that's what you hear about all the time, that's all they measure, cesium-137 and 134, but look at all the rest of the stuff. Barium, lanthanum, cerium, presidium, I can't pronounce that, promethium, samarium, europium. They name them, a lot of them after themselves, these physicists. Gadolinium, I can't, terbium, dysprosium, holmium, thallumium, lutetium, hafnium, tantalum, I don't know, tungsten, rhenium, osmium, iridium, platinum, thallium, lead. Lead-210 is really nasty stuff. That's what probably gives you cancer when you smoke, because the natural isotope that's a decay product of uranium, what is it, radon, decays to lead-210, which has a half-life of, a long half-life, and that's probably what gives people lung cancer from smoking. Bismuth, polonium. Now, you just read that Yasser Arafat was probably killed by polonium. And certainly polonium killed that man, Litvinenko, remember? They dropped some polonium in his tea at Claridge's and he died with his hair falling out, vomiting and bleeding to death, the way I described. Nasty. And it's named after Poland, and my name is Bronowski. I'm Polish, my father was, and it was named by Madame Curie because she was Polish. Radon, which is very dangerous, and they're now saying radon in your cellars up here. Very dangerous, potent carcinogen lung cancer. Radium, which is what Madame Curie extracted from pitch blende. She used to walk around with a lump of radium in her pocket. When she died, her bone, because radium's like calcium, was so full of radium, she was radioactive. They had to bury her in a radioactive waste area. She died of leukemia, well, aplastic anemia, and her daughter died of leukemia. Actinium, francium, thorium, which they're talking about building thorium reactors. I don't have time to go into this today, but if you go to my website, HelenCaldicottFoundation.org, you can read about thorium reactors, which are ridiculously expensive and will never happen. Uranium, which is what you use for nuclear weapons and for reactors. Neptunium, plutonium, most deadly stuff, such that a pound of plutonium, if adequately distributed, could kill most people on Earth. Americium, which dropped on Boston. These are all alpha emitters. Curium, named after Madame Curie. Californium. And is that all? Yeah. That's the most important slide you're going to see tonight. And that's what nobody knows. And why don't they have me on NBC and MSNBC and all those things to talk about this? Or someone else? To educate Mr. and Mrs. Joe Sixpack, who are sitting at home, you know, eating their popcorn and, I don't know, watching whatever. I mean, because if people are educated, and that's what Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion, right? We have to teach. The only way to teach is through the media. The media is determining the fate of the earth, including my almost unmentionable fellow Australian Rupert Murdoch, who championed my career in the beginning when I was on about French tests. But when I started on uranium mining, he blackballed me. Now, I'd like the next slide, the top of the slides, love. Yeah, now this is the work that Tim Mousseau has been doing, Dr. Tim Mousseau, looking at the birds. And if only my pointer worked, I could point out, but you can see the mutations, the white feathers, on the swallows. No, it doesn't work. That's a tumour on C underneath the beak, an abnormal beak, abnormal tail feathers, and of course these birds with mutations don't reproduce because they're not attractive to the other sex. Next. I told you that radiation causes cataracts, and there are a lot of cataracts in Chernobyl amongst the victims, but here are the cataracts in the birds from Chernobyl. What happens to birds happens to us. When you get a cataract, you can't see. I actually had my cataracts removed because I'm old, and as you get older, you get cataracts in your eyes. Actually, it's quite nice because they give you this sort of light anaesthetic. Apparently, I talked all the way through and asked them what they were doing, and when they'd be finished, I don't remember a thing. I think I'm a difficult patient. Okay, next. All doctors are difficult patients. And these are the firebugs that Tim's been collecting, and you can see they've got sort of, they look like an African mask with eyes and nose and mouth, but you can see they're all deformed, all of them. A very important slide. Next. This is how, what happens with they're just talking about radioactive iodine that causes thyroid cancer. That's a beta and a gamma emitter. Cesium-137 that causes muscle cancers, rhabdomyosarcoma, diabetes, sudden heart attacks, thyroid cancer, and other cancers. It mimics potassium, which is ubiquitous in the body, beta and gamma, strontium-90, which is mostly a beta, and it decays to yttrium, which has got a long half-life, and you can see how they concentrate in the food, get into the body via the mouth and the GI tract and into the fetus. And it says up here, the World Health Organization, UNSCR, the IAEA, the International Committee on Radiation Protection, and BEAR, they make worldwide dose limits, as I described earlier. They ignore the human fetus. They ignore internal emitters. They ignore genomic instability, in other words, mutation of genes that are passed on generation to generation, and it takes up to 20 generations for a recessive gene to express itself. They ignore the latent period of carcinogenesis. They ignore every radiation except induced cancer. They only look at thyroid cancers. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? That's criminal. These people should be put in jail. Because nuclear industry is a carcinogenic industry and it's going to kill people for the rest of time, not just with meltdowns, but the radioactive waste has to be stored isolated from the ecosphere for 1 million years, according to the EPA. Where are they going to put it? No container lasts longer than 100 years. So what they're doing is promulgating cancer, leukemia and genetic disease for the rest of time. These people should be tried like the Nazi war criminals were at Nuremberg. And I'm fed up with them. Yeah, the way they get away with it is a latent period of carcinogenesis. As, you know, George Monbiot says to me, no one's died at Fukushima. Well, doesn't he know it takes a while to get cancer? And if he doesn't know, how dare he comment? If he doesn't know anything about medicine, he's got no right to be writing about it, unless he does his research properly. Yeah, next. Okay, so here's Chernobyl over here, just, you know, an empty reactor because all the fuel burnt. And here, of course, is Europe. And the very dark, and you can see Chernobyl with the symbol of radiation up here. And then the very dark areas are uninhabitable zones, exclusion zones. But people still live there. And there's a wonderful man who spoke at my symposium in New York in March called Dr. Wertelecki, who's been looking at a village near Chernobyl, which has been there for hundreds of years, and the people eat their local food, the berries, the mushrooms, the truffles, everything. And he's been looking at the women and the babies, and the women have got a lot of cesium in their bodies because they're eating the food, and the women are having babies, conjoined twins, Siamese twins, babies with single eyes, cyclops, babies with no brains called anencephaly. I've delivered such a baby. They have a little nubbin of brainstem, and so they'll cough, cry, suck, and they're dead within about a week. Babies with no arms and the like, a very high incidence of congenital anomalies. But you can see much of Europe, particularly Sweden and Finland and the Ukraine and Belarus, when the accident occurred, most children in Belarus were healthy. Now only 20% of them are healthy. You know, and I have to argue with these characters that nuclear power is absolutely the thing to have. So 40% of Europe is still radioactive, will be for hundreds of years. Turkey, which isn't on the map, got such a high fallout. The Turkish government was furious, and they picked all their radioactive tea and sent it back to Russia to serve them right. There are about 260 farms growing sheep and lambs in the United Kingdom, which have to be closed because their lambs are full of cesium. And so it goes, you know, don't eat any European food because you don't know what's radioactive and what's not. Next, and that's only cesium. That's only cesium deposition. Okay, these are the Chernobyl children. They're like thalidomide children because if a baby's exposed, a fetus is exposed to radiation in the first trimester, which is when the arms and the brain, all the organs develop. In the second 2 trimesters, the baby grows in size. So if it's exposed to some plutonium or radiation, it can kill a cell that's going to form the right arm or the legs or the brain. And there are homes full of babies and children around Chernobyl like this. And there's a film called Chernobyl Heart, which I would recommend to you, that you can download and see this. It's absolutely devastating. Next. Okay, so here is Fukushima over here on the east coast, and the very, very high radiation levels where several million, 2 million people, I think, live in that very high radiation zone, like Chernobyl, but unlike Russia, where they've evacuated most of the people, not all, Japan hasn't. And Japan is much more heavily populated per square mile than, of course, around Chernobyl. So a hell of a lot of people are being exposed. The lighter yellow areas are less radiation, but still the blue areas are a lot of radiation, and it came all the way down to Tokyo. And Arnie Gunderson has taken soil from the streets in Tokyo just randomly, dust from the vacuum cleaners in apartments and moss on the roof, measured the radioactive isotopes, and it's so radioactive that it would be qualified to be buried in a radioactive waste dump in America. And people, 35 million people live in Tokyo. And now they're going to get the Olympic Games. And the waste from the tsunami and radioactive stuff and taking it to towns all over Japan and incinerating it in incinerators. And they're taking the ash, radioactive ash, and putting it in the harbour in Tokyo where the athletes are going to swim. Next. Well, this is what happens to tomatoes. So I don't know, I don't think there's much else I need to say. I think probably, oh yeah, I do need to say one more thing. What time is it? Well, Will gave a magnificent speech. This is a country that has socialised killing and capitalistic medical care. To hell with you, but it's really good for the military-industrial complex to take all your tax dollars, over $1 trillion a year for killing. The Pentagon is about murder, and I'm going to write a book called Why Men Kill and Why Women Let Them, because we're wimps. And I want to look at the real etiology or cause of the killing. You know, is it the reptilian midbrain and all sorts of stuff, and hormone receptors and Jungian archetypes, and, you know, the church and how many millions of people were killed in the 20th century in the name of God, or how many people have been killed in the name of God. I mean, you know, it's so ridiculous. I don't think there's a God anyway, but that's my personal opinion. I'm a pantheist. I worship nature. I worship evolution and human beings. But I've lost it. Yeah, so the Pentagon, you know, who runs the Pentagon is Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, And I once called Route 128 America's death highway, and it is. You know, you pass all these blasted corporations who are just ripping money off you, and it's great because you can make plans, and if they crash during the war, then you have to make another plan. So war is very important, and that's why the Pentagon were very keen to go in and bomb the hell out of Syria when there are 3 million refugees already. Can you imagine families being rooted up and their children, and they're getting polio now? I mean, it is just hideous. In Iraq, what America did in Iraq is hideous. The sewage in the streets, the electricity doesn't work properly. Now there are people blowing people up all the time in the markets and stuff. Under Hussein and in Libya, Gaddafi, the two countries in the Middle East, before America interfered, had the lowest infant mortality rate and the highest rate of literacy. How dare America go into those other countries and say they're the world's policeman? Who does America think it is? The world's policeman? No. Exceptionalism? I say you're not the greatest country on earth. What about Australia? We've got kangaroos. No? But it's just this crazy. And then after 9/11, I was here. I'd just flown in to Eau Claire, Wisconsin to speak to 1,000 kids that night. And I thought, God almighty, what am I going to say? And it was a very Bible-bashing place. Someone got to me on the campus. I was going for a swim, and she said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And I said, "No, I'm a pantheist." And she just psychologically hit me in the face and said, "You'll go to hell." I mean, slammed me. And I thought, this is really queer. So I got out the Bible and I read Luke. "Love thine enemy, do good to those who hate you." And then I went by Greyhound bus. I was meant to fly to Paris, but there were no planes. They flew out all the bin Ladens out the next day. Yep. So I caught the Greyhound across the country, and America was swathed in flags. God bless America at every mum and pop store. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to do something terrible. They went into Afghanistan, the poorest country in the world. They could easily have got bin Laden if they wanted to and killed him. That's what you do without giving them a trial. And how many people have been killed in Afghanistan and goes on. And then stupid little George II, he went into Iraq because they had plans for that. One of your generals said, just after 9/11, they had plans before 9/11 to go into 5 countries. Syria, Lebanon, I think, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran. And anyway, Israel's got the 3rd largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons? I mean, how dare Israel can neither confirm nor deny she's got nuclear weapons? How dare she? How dare she? And how dare America, lead the nuclear arms race all the way except one, and Russia stupidly, blindly copied and followed. So today, there are about 20,000 hydrogen bombs in the world, right? Russia and America own 94% of them. Oh, but what about Iran? Whoa! What about North Korea? Ooh! Hypocrites. See not the mote in the other person's eye, look instead for the mote in your own eye. It's this country that's determining the fate of the earth. Because your weapons, over 1,000, are still on hair trigger alert, with a 3-minute decision time by Obama to press the button. And if you watch him, always walking behind him is an officer with a suitcase called the football, with nuclear codes to start a nuclear war. When Reagan was shot, they lost the football for 2 days. Yeltsin got to within a couple of seconds of pressing the button in '95 when America launched a weather satellite from Norway, and they were sure that America had launched a first strike from the Trident subs off the coast. The Pentagon had told the Kremlin, but the Kremlin forgot and lost the data. So nuclear war could start by hackers. Over 1,000 hackers a day are hacking into the Pentagon. I've got a 16-year-old grandson, 17. No frontal lobe development yet at all, smart as hell. And they walk through the sitting room, "Hi, Grandma," and you think, what are these kids going to do? One of them's going to be smart enough to hack into the early warning system and think it's a hell of a thing to blow up the world. And I spoke to a computer specialist recently in Minneapolis, I think, and I said, why hasn't it happened? He said, they haven't worked it out yet. How dare America have enough weapons to destroy life on Earth? And how dare Russia? And now you're best friends. What the hell is going on? And no one takes responsibility, and we were scared as hell during the Cold War, but the Cold War ended and we thought, oh well, they'll get rid of the weapons. No, because Clinton got in, who has no backbone. And he left the weapons in place, and we handed him on a silver platter the ability to write an accord, get an Air Force One, fly over to Yeltsin, who is a hardened alcoholic with Korsakoff syndrome and Wernicke's encephalopathy, and totally compliant, and say, okay, Boris, sign here, we're going to abolish nuclear weapons. And he would have. So if we're blown up tonight, and I don't know if NPR still has this thing, ooh, we're just testing the emergency broadcasting system. They still play it? Yeah, well, it means, you know, run to the nearest fallout shelter, but, you know, you'll be asphyxiated and pressure cooked anyway if you go into a fallout shelter. There are 20 hydrogen bombs targeted on New York as I speak. Robert McNamara and I wrote a piece for the LA Times about it. I mean, and no one's talking about it. It's like a mass psychosis, a nuclear psychosis. Oh, and we're all into gourmet foods and fashions and manic denial. Displacement activity. If you put rats in a cage and threaten them with a lethal situation, they run away and do something irrelevant to that which threatens them. And then we've got global warming. There's no evidence to me that this country is going to do a goddamn thing about it. People driving their kids to ballet in tanks, using, you know, 3 gallons to the mile. It's obscene. Obama's got no backbone either. What a disappointment. And you're the country that will determine the fate of the earth, because we all emulate you because you put out awful advertising all over the world. And it's all about coveting thy neighbour's goods. You know, if you just have this thing and this thing, you'll live happily till you die. And what is it, 30% Americans are on antidepressants? Because the only way to make yourself happy is to serve others. Right? I'm never happier than when I've spent a day in my clinic with my dying children, counselling the parents and helping the children. I drive home desperately hungry, desperately tired and deeply satisfied. We're here to serve. And we can save the world. We can save the world from global warming. We can close down all the reactors. If we decide and we get out like the people in Wisconsin did, sitting at your computer does nothing. Got to use your bodies. Do we love our grandchildren enough? Can we look them in the eye and saying, I'm doing everything I can for your future? Why even immunise our children or give them good medical care or educate them when they do not have a future? Because the way we're going, it's going to be 6 degrees centigrade hotter by the end of the century. We can't survive that. We'll die. Are we an evolutionary aberrant, planning to blow ourselves up and 30 million other species? Or produce epidemics of cancer, leukemia and genetic disease in the rest of time from our radioactive waste? Or having a nuclear war? And I'm going to show you one last thing for you to understand. You've got 14 Trident submarines. On each Trident submarine are 24 missiles. On each missile are 8 hydrogen bombs. They're called passengers. And the missiles are called bombs. So when they're launched, they go into space and then they drop their passengers off at certain points and each bomb lands accurately on target. But they're not good enough. America wants to spend $400 billion more on weapons. You've got to close down that Pentagon. Close it down. Close it down. Talk about national security. What's national security when people are dying because they can't get medical care? I'm nearly finished. 40% of bankruptcies are 50% are from medical stuff that people can't pay. So I need 5 volunteers, young ones. You. That's enough. Come up on the stage. This is a Trident submarine. Just come up. And on each quarto page, each page represents a missile. And each of those black things are hydrogen bombs, much larger than the Hiroshima bomb, much, by orders of magnitude. 8 hydrogen bombs, 24 missiles. And this is a Trident. And they're ploughing the seas silently every minute of every day, ready to launch. And a captain could launch without negotiating with the Pentagon. What? No, they're much, much bigger than Hiroshima. They're hydrogen bombs. I can't remember how many times larger, but very much larger. One of these would decimate a city, cause a firestorm of 3,000 square miles. So only one of these on Boston would wipe Boston out. There are only 250 cities in the Northern Hemisphere. They're all targeted. All your towns greater than 50,000 are targeted. All your universities, your industries are all targeted. Yeah, but Russia's got the same number and they target you. You target China since the Cold War ended, and Russia, and they target Europe, Britain, Australia, Canada and you. Tit for tat. Okay, that's the end. There is no more. Thank you.